Happy Monday, everybody. Hope you're all having a good one. So we're doing the best of one, best of three meta review for Standard in Foundations. We're on to week 9. And I just wanted to give a quick special thank you to my new YouTube members. It's the most that I've ever had, so thank you for the support. Dr. Brand, MX, Kiko, Go Chiles Smith, and Nathan Reiber, thank you very much for joining this week. And thank you to the YouTube members that I had previously, of course. And so every week what I do is I cover the top 8 decks from Bronze to Mythic according to a third-party tracker called Untapped. And this is a way that I can kind of keep the podcast informational and remove some of my own personal bias. And I have been playing Magic the Gathering since Portal in '97, so hopefully I can give some insights because I spend far too many hours each day playing Magic the Gathering. So number 1 in Tier 1 is Mono Red Aggro, and if you're new here, what I try to do is I try to also talk about how the decks have been changing throughout the weeks, so that if you are new and returning to Magic, you can kind of get an idea of what might be just an exploration instead of a core of the deck. And I will also go over the matchups for the decks as well as what you should look for in your opening hand. So this week we've bumped up the Manifold Mouse to a full playset of 4, and also brought in the 4th copy of the Screaming Nemesis. What we see the 4 copies of Burst Lightning have been removed, and instead we've got the Shocks, and we've got 4 copies of the Turn Inside Out are gone as well. So the Turn Inside Out can give you kind of a burst like the Monstrous Rage for the +3/+0, and can kind of give you the creating in the 2/2 in response to removal. And the Shock honestly could be a Burst Lightning. I think the Burst Lightning is basically a Shock with upside because you can kick it. You're not usually going to have a moment where you do kick it, so they're largely the same, but I do think that the Burst Lightning is slightly better. The third copy of the Witchstalker Frenzy came in because we're bringing the Screaming Nemesis up to 4. These pair together nicely because the Witchstalker Frenzy most of the time is shooting the Screaming Nemesis so that you can deal 5 damage to your opponent's face. And we're also running 2 additional Urbresks Forge, or bringing back the Urbresks Forge. We've seen these kind of come and go throughout the weeks. It depends on if you need to extend into the mid-range and how much single point interaction is currently in the meta. So this gives you some inevitability in some matchups. And then we're just straight up dropping 2 mountains. So running 19 lands instead of 21, even though we're bringing up the curve with the Urbresks Forge. So there's a couple of things that personally I'm not 100% sold on, but again, that's why I use the tracker. The deck overall is favored against Dimir midrange, and we're seeing an issue happening right now where the meta is getting kind of shaken up a little bit by the Dimir and Esper Bounce decks. And they're growing quite a bit in popularity. The tracker has not gotten to the point where it has updated that as an archetype. So keep that in mind that the Esper Bounce or the Dimir Bounce decks are probably within the top 8. And if you are thinking about crafting, you may want to hold off until the meta settles, or maybe even after Aether Drift in February. So we've got some time till then, though. So when I say favored against Dimir midrange, it's a split between actual Dimir midrange and what the tracker is calling Dimir midrange when it is in fact Dimir Bounce. Either way, Mono Red Aggro is a good strategy against the Esper Bounce decks and the Dimir Bounce decks. It's also good against Golgari midrange, Mono Black Discard, Azorius Control, Azorius Oculus, and Selesnya Rabbits. Basically, if the deck can struggle against the early aggression and the fast tempo of this deck, the deck that the archetype that this is weak to that counters the strategy is Mono Black midrange because it has the single point interaction and plenty of it to destroy your Heartfire Heroes and your Manifold Mouse, etc. Screaming Nemesis is weaker to the black removal than damage based like red removal. And Boros Auras is also a hard deck for this match, so it's weak to the Boros Auras. The Sheltered by Ghosts, the life gain off of that especially can be problematic. And then it's also weak to Rakdos Aggro. And Rakdos Aggro is not running Disruptive Elements most of the time, and instead is trying to win a turn sooner than the Mono Red Aggro strategy. The opening hand that you're looking for is Heartfire Hero. and Hired Claw, you definitely want to be starting on turn 1 in this archetype, and these are your best ones to do so. Monastery Swiftspear is less impressive. And then if you do have the Heartfire hero, the Manifold Mouse is a particularly nice turn 2. Number 2 is Selesnya Rabbits, also in tier 1. And so this is where we're going to see a change in the meta. Selesnya Rabbits has been hanging out in tier 2 in the previous weeks, and because of its matchup against Dimir Bounce, we're seeing Selesnya Rabbits come up higher into tier 1. And so this one is going back to the older version of Selesnya Rabbits, so this one is not running the Hinterland Sanctifier or the Pollen Shield Hair / Hair Rising. It's bringing back the 2 copies of the Sanguine Evangelist, as well as the 4 copies of the Seasoned Wearing Guard, and the 1 copy of the Season of the Burrow. And this was the standard build for Selesnya Rabbits prior to Sheltered by Ghosts kind of shaking things up. So this one is also dropping the 4 copies of the Sheltered by Ghosts, and we see a tweak to the lands, kind of returning back to the original build with the Oak Hollow Villages and such. So we're dropping the 3 copies of the Brushland and the 2 copies of the Lush Portico and 1 Razor Verge Thicket to bring in the 2 copies of the Lupine Village, the 4 Oak Hollow Villages, and 1 Plains. So we'll see throughout the weeks if this one still remains number 1. It was number 1 in the past. I think the Sheltered by Ghosts one personally has a lot to offer in making this matchup better against the mono-red aggro strategy. So this deck is favored against mono-black midrange because of the go wide. The offspring off of the Pop Patch Recruit, Hop to It, Wearin War Leader, all creates multiple rectangles per 1 card. Same with the Sanguine Evangelist. So it's particularly resistant to single point interaction. It's also the Dimir Bounce deck is filled with single point interaction, and so this is a good archetype to run if you're bumping into a lot of the Dimir Pixie deck, right? The you know what I'm talking about, right? Or we'll cover it if you don't. So it's weak to, or it's favored against mono black discard. Same thing, the 1-for-1 attrition strategy doesn't work very well. And then it's also favored against domain. Just getting off the ground too quickly before the sunfall can kind of reset everything. And the Knight Errant of Eos helps you kind of be more resilient to that strategy. It is weak, though, to mono-red aggro. Not having any single-point interaction means that there's no disruption of their curve, and their curve is faster. It's weak to Boros Auras, and really, really weak to Boros Auras. And again, not having the single-point interaction to punish the Sheltered by Ghosts and stop the Voltron effect, if you will. It's also weak to Azorius Control, and that one because Azorius Control is running more copies of Split Up or Temporary Lockdown, which this deck is a little bit more weak to than the Sunfalls in Domain. And the opening hand is also look for your turn 1s, especially Valley Mightcaller and Pop Hatch Recruit. These have been very impressive and are the cards that I look for in my opening hand. And then if you are playing the Hinterland Sanctifier, that one is also good in your opening hand. Number 3 in Tier 2 is Rakdos Aggro. And there are 24 total decks in Tier 2, which are all viable strategies to take to Mythic. So right now, we still see a very diverse and healthy meta. I've been having a lot of fun and enjoying it quite a bit. This one, so this week we see the Manifold Mouse getting dropped down by 3 copies. I'm not sure I'm completely sold on that decision because this is usually one of the cards that I'm looking for in my opening hand. But again, to try to remove my bias, here we go. We've got 4 copies of the Monastery Swiftspear coming in, and we've got 4 copies of the Emberheart Challenger. So kind of bringing in more of the mouse core, but while getting rid of some of the mouse core. It's kind of an interesting take. We're also seeing the 4 copies of the Burst Lightning being removed from this one, as well as 3 copies of Might of the Meek. And going back kind of to the more linear strategy that doesn't have the interaction from the Burst Lightning. And the more interaction that you're going to bring in, the more it's going to make it into a coin flip against mono red. That also has the interaction. If you don't have the interaction and you focus on turn inside out and monstrous rage, you're trying to win the turn sooner, and you're more of a pure aggro deck instead of a disruptive aggro deck. If you want to get really into the nitty gritty details, right? So this one kind of leaning more back to the pure aggro form, also dropping the Torch the Tower and bringing in the 4 copies of the Mirror and Bane Splitter. And this one does have the ability to, go on to a Heartfire Hero or Cacophony Scamp and then sit there, so that if they do have removal for it the following turn, you're still getting that damage. And then it does allow you to re-equip later if you are flooding out and the game goes a little bit long. Now, this is also dropping the black lands, so the Blackcleave Cliffs and the Sulphurous Springs, as well as the 2 copies of the Rockface Village have been removed, and instead we're bringing in 1 Blazemire Verge and 8 Mountains. And this deck is functional without any black mana. Usually, you just need the Callous Sellsword's Adventure side burned together to hit your turn 3 win off of either the Cacophony Scamp, the Heartfire Hero, or the Slickshot Show-Off. So Callous Sellsword will hit for 3 times the power of the Cacophony Scamp or the Heartfire Hero if they are unblocked. And then Slickshot Show-Off, if you can get this to power 9, the Sellsword boosts its power up to 11 and hits them for 11 damage. So to do either one of those, get this, get these up to 7 and such, you use your combat tricks like Monstrous Rage, Turn Inside Out, Felonious Rage, sometimes Dreadmaw's Ire, Bane Splitter in this case, to get the damage and try to do the 1-turn kill. So this strategy is favored against mono red aggro because it's a turn faster. It's a coin flip against Dimir midrange, and again I say Dimir midrange largely meaning Dimir bounce, I believe. I have found personally that in Diamond and above that the Rakdos Aggro strategy is actually pretty countered by the Dimir midrange when we're talking specifically about the bounce strategy. So it kind of depends on how good your opponent is and if they know when to hold up the interaction to not get hit by the 1-turn kill. And then it is weak against mono black midrange, similar to the mono red, getting disrupted by the single point interaction. And it's also weak to Boros Auras because of the life gain. And the opening hand, you're going to be looking for Heartfire Hero and the Manifold Mouse. And you can also, the Emberheart Challenger and your Monstrous Rage are decent as well. If you have the Slickshot Show-Off, definitely look to see if you have the turn 3 combo of the Sellsword plus 2 combat tricks. That's also a really good opening hand, but not one that I would mulligan for. And Boros Auras has fallen into tier 2, and again this is largely due to the matchup against the Dimir Bounce deck. Has definitely hit this archetype a little bit because the disruption on the Sheltered by Ghosts is problematic. So this week what we see is a increase of 1 copy of Atali's Favor. We see the return of the standard kind of land build, I would say. Maybe Thran Portals sometimes included as a standard part of this, but we've got the Battlefield Forge and the Inspiring Vantage are coming back instead of 3 mountains and 4 plains. And so we're running 1 less land to bring in an additional Atali's Favor. And this archetype is favored against mono red aggro because of the life gain. It's favored against domain. Largely getting in enough pressure too early to punish domain's strategy. It's also favored against Golgari midrange, Azorius Oculus, Selesnya Rabbits, and Rakdos Aggro. Anything that kind of lacks the single point interaction. Domain does have the leyline binding and the get losts, and so that one can be closer to a coin flip. It is a coin flip against Dimir midrange, and again that time will tell once we actually separate Dimir midrange from Dimir bounce. But for the time being, I'm gonna treat that as kind of a coin flip against Dimir bounce, and I think disadvantaged actually, because it's a mixture again in the data. So hopefully we'll get some clarification on that in the coming weeks. It's a coin flip against Azorius control, largely if they hit the temporary lockdown or not. It's weak against mono black midrange, the single point interaction largely leading to a 2-for-1. And then its opening hand is Heartfire Hero and the Sheltered by Ghosts. Really stand a tier above the rest in your opening hand. And then number 5 at tier 2 is Mardu Aggro, which is largely the same strategy as Boros Auras. And there's no changes to this list from the previous weeks, so we're not really going to cover it too quickly in too much detail. It's favored against mono red aggro, again, the life gain. It's a coin flip against Boros Auras. The reason why you bring in the Carousel Sword, though, is it does make it a slightly favorable coin flip against Boros Auras in the mirror match, where this can end up making you win a turn sooner. There are only 2 copies, though, right? It's also still a coin flip against Dimir midrange, and it's weak to mono black midrange. And the opening hand is Heartfire Hero and Sheltered by Ghosts. Number 6 is mono red Goblins in tier 2, and it also not having no changes this week from the last time that we covered it. So we'll kind of glance over this one as well. And it's favored against mono black discard, being a little bit better at going wide and like the recurrence of Squee. Squee really likes being discarded, and or likes having things be discarded, so it has things to exile. Which makes it a little bit stronger against that archetype. And then it's also favored against Dimir midrange. Again, that one largely meaning Dimir Bounce in my mind, but time will tell. And then Azorius Oculus and Azorius Control. And it's a coin flip against mono black midrange, and instead of being weak to it, again, because this one has a little bit more of a go wide strategy, which punishes the single point interaction. And then it's a coin flip against Golgari midrange and Orzhov Bats. You don't see Orzhov Bats very often, though. And it's weak against mono red aggro. So the downside with this strategy is that it's slower than the mono red aggro strategy and slower than the Rakdos Aggro strategy. But is a fun deck, and I've enjoyed it quite a bit. And it's also weak to Boros Auras, the life gain giving it trouble, and then it's also weak to Boros Burn. So the opening hand for this one, Squee Dubious Monarch, is particularly nice on turn 3 in this archetype, and so it's nice to have in your opening hand. Cacophony Scamp, I think, is your best turn 1 play, and I look for it pretty highly. And then Seer Slicer Goblin is also really nice to have in your opening hand, especially if you have a 1-drop. Number 7, according to Untapped in Tier 2, is Mono Black Midrange, and we see that they dropped the Archfiend of the Dross down to 2 copies from 3, brought in the 4th copy of the Bloodletter of Aclazotz, and 1 copy of Shieldred the Apocalypse. And Shieldred the Apocalypse is going to help you against the mono red strategies and against the any strategy that's leaning into drawing a lot of cards. And the Archfiend of the Dross can be problematic for red-based removal, whereas the Bloodletter of Aclazotz is helping you get your 1-turn kill off of the Unstoppable Slasher. This one is also dropping 3 Soulstone Sanctuaries and bringing in 2 Swamps, so running 1 less land. And the Soulstone Sanctuary does act as a demon with your Unholy Annex, so it does have some synergies there, but is, this... it has some matchups where it's nice and some matchups where it's not so nice. And this archetype is favored against mono red aggro and Boros Auras, mono black discard, and Golgari midrange, Rakdos Aggro. Anything that's weak to the single point interaction. It's a coin flip against Azorius Control, and that one has to deal with, you have a lot of dead cards against Azorius Control, so if they're going to go plan to mill you out, it just kind of comes down to whether or not they can answer you, and sticking an Unholy Annex is a big part of that coin flip. So if you can get the Unholy Annex to resolve, you're going to draw too many cards for the Azorius Control to be able to answer your stuff 1 for 1. And then you've got, this is weak to the Dimir Bounce strategy, it's, or the Dimir midrange strategy, it's weak to Domain, it's weak to Selesnya Rabbits. Anything that's kind of punishing the single point interaction. And the opening hand is, Unholy Annex is particularly nice, similar to Squee, right? Like the archetype, this is, I think, one of the better cards in the archetype. And then Disruption. So you're looking for Cut Down to survive early pressure, Deep Cavern Bat for early interaction and disruption, and then the Unstoppable Slasher and Duress are also particularly nice in your opening hand. And last but not least, number 8, according to Untapped in Tier 2, is Mono White Lifegain. And again, there are no changes from the previous weeks, so we're going to kind of glance over this one. It's favored against mono red aggro. The whole point of this deck was to prey on mono red aggro. So if you're bumping into a lot of red, the mono white life gain is a nice option. It's a coin flip against the Dimir midrange deck, and again, that Dimir Bounce we'll see, but it kind of feels like a coin flip there. It's weak to mono black midrange and Boros Auras. Boros Auras being able to kind of build the Voltron faster than this strategy. And then the mono black mid-range being able to 2-for-1 the Sheltered by Ghosts. And the opening hand, you're definitely looking for a Leyline of Hope if you are running it. And then the Leonin Vanguard, the Essence Channeler, Runelurker Bat, and Hinterland Sanctifier. Pretty much the whole deck area. Pridemate's really not that bad to have in your opening hand either. You don't have to mulligan too heavily in this archetype because there are so many good hits. But yeah, you're basically trying to start off the curve early with your life gain enablers and your payoffs that grow well. All right, and now on to best of 3. And what I like to do for best of 3 is cover the standard challenge on Magic the Gathering Online. And so we're going to be going into the nitty-gritty details for anybody who's trying to prep for an RCQ. I really like, especially in the best of 3, to try to give as much information as I can. And so Gruul Prowess by Venom 1 took down the standard challenge on January 9th. Notably this week, there were no standard challenges on Saturday, so that's why I'm including Wednesday. So we have at least 6 that we can talk about. And this week, Gruul Prowess did very well, finishing in the top 2 with 3 different versions, 2 of which were the same. So good week for Gruul Prowess. And this week, we can see that they dropped the Hired Claw and brought in the 4 copies of the Monastery Swiftspear. This one is going to be utilizing the haste more readily than the Hired Claw, which has the threaten better. So the Hired Claw is better at getting over early creatures, whereas Monastery Swiftspear is better against the sorcery speed and like your opponent's removal because of the haste. So this week we're also seeing the Obliterating Bolt coming, and largely that you can kind of like they're largely interchangeable. It's very nitpicky. The Obliterating Bolt is coming in, and this one is particularly nice against like Dimir midrange, being able to get rid of the Enduring Curiosity. We're getting rid of the Scorching Dragonfires, which also exile and the Torch the Towers, which for the sticky threats like the anything that comes back, the Unstoppable Slashers, the Mosswood Dread Knights, anything that deserves exile early, the early interaction for that is nice. We're dropping the 2 copies of the Witchstalker Frenzy, and that one I thought was kind of interesting because we do have a full playset of the Screaming Nemesis. But because people are more ready for you to target this with the Witchstalker's Frenzy, and then they use the interaction then to remove the Screaming Nemesis, it can largely lead to a 2-for-1. And so we'll talk about that in a second. They moved it to the sideboard so that you can bring it in during the match where that's not going to happen. And we're dropping the Barbed Batterfist, which was one that was kind of brought in to be a cheap way to trigger the Valiant of Heartfire Hero. And we're bringing in a Mountain and the Soulstone Sanctuaries. And so if you go and look at the Community tab, you can look at the sideboard guide that I made, and it'll showcase kind of the matchups where the Soulstone Sanctuary is good. Generally, the more disruption that they're running, the more the manlands are better. Less so in the more aggressive aggro archetypes. So we're also bringing back the full playset of the Innkeeper's Talent. Again, this one kind of comes and goes depending on how much you think that your opponent is going to be bringing in a whole bunch of like Exercise and Destroy Evil, Terra Sunders, all the enchantment hate currently in the meta. So the sideboard also got a rework, and so we've dropped the Fire Annihilation, which was a tech against Boros Mice because of being able to exile Mabel's Sword, and we also see Lithomantic Barrage getting lowered, Paw Patch Formation as well as going to 3 copies, and Lithomantic Barrage is good against any blue and white decks. Paw Patch Formation is also your enchantment hate for the Innkeeper's Talent and Domain, the Zur enchant deck as well. We're also dropping the 2 copies of the Pyroclasm, which was, I think, again for Boros Mice, and instead we're bringing in 1 copy of the Obliterating Bolt, which helps up against Dimir midrange. We're dropping the Scorching Shot, which this one was explored, I think, last week for if they're bringing in Shieldred or something that has 5 toughness, then the Obliterating Bolt doesn't get over that target. And the Witchstalker Frenzy you could also bring in if they're bringing in the 5 toughness. This strategy is leaning a little bit further away from the Witchstalker Frenzy Screaming Nemesis, but it still has the single point interaction of Burst Lightning, as well as Torch the Tower, where you can shoot the Screaming Nemesis if they are a life gain strategy. This one's also bringing in 2 copies of the Snakeskin Veil, and again, this one depends on how much single point interaction and what targets you're going to try to protect with your Snakeskin Veils. We have a 3rd copy of the Torch the Tower, and I like to bring this one in against the other aggro mono red, Gruul Prowess, Boros Prowess, Dimir Midrange, anything that has early stuff that you want to disrupt, you bring in the Torch the Towers. And then, like I said, the Witchstalker Frenzy in the sideboard is a little bit of a different take than what we're used to seeing in this archetype. And I kind of like it, because then if they aren't playing like mono black, like if they don't have Go for the Throat, then you can bring in Witchstalker Frenzy. And you can also bring it in if they do have something that lines up nicely for the Witchstalker Frenzy. Number 2 on January 9th was Esper Bounce by the Witch Cling. And so this is the archetype that I was talking about, where it has yet to show up on the tracker in Best of 1, but is prevalent in the Best of 1 meta. And the Dimir version of this is dropping the Nurturing Pixie, Scavenger, and Sheltered by Ghosts to run Cut Down and Go for the Throat, and usually Enduring Curiosity or some form of card draw, Bottomless Pool, those sort of things. This is a new archetype that has shown up in quite some popularity and has been doing quite well. So this one is running 3 copies of Kaido, Bane of Nightmares, and works really nicely with being able to bounce your Nurturing Pixie or your Fear of Isolation off of the Ninjutsu so that you can replay it. This one's dropping the 3 copies of the Mockingbird, and I haven't played this archetype enough to say the pros and cons of the Mockingbird to the fullest extent, but generally Mockingbird is worse if your opponent is able to destroy what it's copying, and better that if you're in a deck that can take advantage of the early flyer. And we're also dropping 2 copies, or bringing in 2 copies of Go for the Throat, which we see more in the Dimir Bounce versions. Having the single point interaction is quite nice. This one is dropping the Bottomless Pool, Locker Room, and 1 Sheltered by Ghosts, and instead is bringing in a Defiled Crypt. And I thought that one was kind of an interesting one, because you are bringing stuff out of your graveyard when you get later into the game with the Storm Chaser's talent. You're bringing back your This Town Ain't Big Enough, which then triggers your Defiled Crypt. And then you can also use this as a way to get back a Pixie or a Scavenger or something that died to single point interaction. So kind of a different way to get value instead of drawing cards like the Bottomless Pool, Locker Room. Defiled Crypt also having the benefit of being black. So you can kind of tweak the sources to be more primarily black and less blue. The problem I think I have, though, with a little bit of that direction is that the Storm Chaser's talent is a particularly nice one to have on turn 1. So we're dropping 2 A Darker Waste to bring in 2 Restless Anchorage, and bringing in 1 Swamp to reflect the more mono-black kind of push, and then the Restless Anchorage giving you a man land in case they are able to disrupt your bounce strategy. So the sideboard also got a rework, so we're dropping Lorn of the Third Path, which is the Artifact Hate. We're dropping 1 copy of No More Lies, which this deck I think is prone to sweepers, the temporary lockdowns and split ups, but we're not seeing a whole lot of that in the meta. So I think that's why we see the No More Lies being dropped down to 2 from 3 from 3 copies. And then we're also dropping the 3 we're also dropping the 2 copies of the Shrouded Shepherd Cleave Shadows, which is the -1/-1 to the board Adventure-side white card. And because we're going to be bringing in the pest controls, we're dropping 2 Tishana's Tidebinders, and that one's I like that one against like the Kaidos in the meta. And then we're dropping the Tithing Blade, which was explored in this deck because you can repeatedly bounce it, but it's an artifact instead of an enchantment. And we're bringing in a little bit more of the interactions. So we're bringing in a single copy of the Cut Down for the aggro strategy. Again, like Gruul Prowess and Mono Red aggro can kind of get through this strategy before its disruption is really set in place. So I like the Cut Down here. And then we also have an additional copy of the Destroy Evil, and this is good for the mirror match because there are problematic enchantments that you can target with the Destroy Evil. Also good for domain And we've also got the additional copy of Kaido Bane of Nightmares. So we can drop this or bring this up all the way to 4 if it's a good matchup to do so. And generally that one would be the more aggressive line. Like in Dimir Midrange, we'll see the 4th copy of Kaido come in when you're trying to be faster than a control deck. Come out when you're wanting to be a little bit more controlling. And then the pest control gives you a better sweeper, I think, than the Shrouded Shepherd, being able to get rid of things that aren't just 1/1s. And then we're also seeing the Witch's Vanity. And if you go back and you look at the Cabeza de la Bolo, they were running back in the Orsov Pixie deck long ago. They were running the Witch's Vanity as a way to kind of help improve the matchup against mono red. So you also have the cut down, but it gives you that enchantment synergies. And then if anything has a lot of mana value 2 or less, you're able to destroy it. Creating a food token gives you the life that you can pop, and then the Wicked roll. I guess you can use it to kind of like replace other roles in this deck, but anyway, it worked well in Orsov Pixie in the past, and so this one is also called Esper Pixie sometimes, and so I think that's a good inclusion to bring in, and curious to see if it stays throughout the weeks. All right, the second version of Gruul Prowess is by Sake Izumo. Oof, sorry, massacred that one. Took down first place on the standard challenge on January 10th. And this one is more of a Slickshot show-off Leyline Resonance, which we haven't seen for a while as well. And so this one is coming back. And so we're also dropping the Hired Claws, the Pop Hatch Recruits, the Questing Druids, and the Screaming Nemesis to go for more of the the turn 3 kill strategy of Cacophony Scamp and the Callous Sellsword, be able to fling it, and the Slickshot show-offs. So similar to the Rakdos Aggro strategy, but bringing in a little bit of the protection that the green has to offer. And so this can definitely catch people off guard if they're not expecting it. And starting off with the Leyline Resonance allows you to get a turn 2 win with Cacophony Scamp is possible in this archetype. So because it allows you to do things twice, you can then hit something with the turn inside out and then fling it on turn 2. So Cacophony, Leyline of Resonance, Cacophony Scamp, turn inside out, fling it. GG. Turn 2. Let's go. So we're getting rid of all of the interaction. We're getting rid of the Burst Lightnings, the Scorching Dragonfires, the Torch the Towers, the Witchstalker Frenzies, going for more of the pure aggro combat tricks with the Giant Growth, because that also works for the 3 power. Same with the Monstrous Rage. Actually, Monstrous Rage is 1 short, because it duplicates, and it's 3 the first time and then 2 the second time, so you end up with 6 power, and you need to get this to 7, right? So do keep that in mind. You need a turn inside out or a Giant Growth to do the turn 2. But still, anyway, you can get a lot of burst damage out of it. And then, turn inside out coming in because it gives you the +3/+0, and then dropping the Barbed Batterfist because we're not doing that strategy, and bringing in the 4 copies of the Leyline of Resonance. And this card was banned in Best of 1 of Standard, but is still still allowed in Best of 3. And then we're also dropping the Manlands, so no Restless Ridgeline. We're dropping the Rockface Village because we want to combo off as quickly as we can. And then we're bringing in 4 mountains. The Best of 3 sideboard also got a rework, if you will. So dropping the Fire Annihilation, the Lithomatic Barrage, the Paw Patch Formation, the Pyroclasm, to bring in 3 copies of Burst Lightning. And so this, we can switch over to more of a non-linear interactive strategy if we need to, if something is actually faster than we are. Or if we need a little bit of reach. Then we're also bringing in the Ghost Vacuum, and this gives us a little bit of Graveyard Hate, and we're bringing in the 4 copies of the Pop Hatch Recruit, which I really like, because it's like, Snakeskin Veil is a good deterrent, but so is Pop Hatch Recruit. If you have things on the board, then Pop Hatch Recruit is very punishing to the single point interaction, and we've seen it being explored in the Gruul archetype. So full playset, seems like it's a thumbs up from this pilot that it's looking pretty good. And then we have an additional Questing Druid, Seek the Beast. You're going to bring these in when you need additional dig. So against aggro, not so much. That's where you're going to see more of the burst lightnings. Against the grindier matchups that have more interaction to break up your combo, the questing druid then allows you to dig for additional gas. And then number 2 on the January 10th on the standard challenge was mono white token control by Fleet Wheels. And if we compare this to the previous time we covered mono white token control, we can see that they dropped an ossification for a split up. Pretty straightforward. This is better against the go wide strategies, whereas ossification is better against the single target and planeswalkers. We also see demolition field being dropped by 2, and bringing in a planes and a 4th copy of the Sunken Citadel. And the Sunken Citadel pairs with the Fountain Port to be able to activate those more cheaply. The best of 3 sideboard also got a rework, so we're dropping the Authority of Consuls down to 2 from 4. We're also dropping the Boonbringer Valkyrie, 1 copy of Exercise, the Regal Caracol, which was being explored to keep up with other go-wide strategies, and the 1 split up was moved from the sideboard to the main. We're bringing in an additional copy of Destroy Evil because we're seeing more Dimir Bounce. I think there's more enchantment targets that, the upside, I guess, to the Destroy Evil over the Exercise, because they both target enchantments. Exercise can shoot the artifact, whereas Destroy Evil can't. And Destroy Evil can destroy something with toughness 4 or greater, whereas Exercise destroys power 4 or greater. So Destroy Evil is better against Preacher of the Schism than Exercise, for example. And we see an additional copy of the Elspeth Smite. And I kind of like the Elspeth Smite tech instead of the Authority of the Consuls. Because people can play around the Authority of the Consuls a little bit. Like if they get a good creature threat in play and then Voltron it out, they're not really necessarily playing more creatures in the Esper Pixie deck, for example, right? And so then Elspeth Smite is nice because it removes the thing that's already been down and made it through. Realmbreaker, the Invasion Tree, is definitely one that I did not expect to see in this archetype. Being able to give you an alternative win condition of milling your opponent. Generally, this sort of thing comes in against other control matchups and not aggro. We have an additional copy of Rest in Peace. Personally, I like 2. But again, this is not my deck. But Rest in Peace is good against the Endurings and Dimir Midrange, the Enduring Vitality and Dimir Otters, anything that's graveyard dependent, Azorius Oculus, Reanimator strategies, anything that needs the graveyard, then you're going to bring in all 3 copies of the Rest in Peace. And we also have 2 copies of the Stone Brain. And we've seen the Stone Brain as a tool that's been brought in by some pilots, and it's particularly nice against combo decks. And the biggest combo decks are Domain and Temur Otters. Being able to get rid of the Flood Caller, that sort of thing. If there's a single crux or single point in the deck that the deck kind of doesn't function without, you're going to bring in the Stone Brain. And the last deck that we're going to cover this week is Azorius Omniscience by Suya Some, which took down number 1 on the Sunday tournament on January 12th. And number 2 was Gruul Prowess by RoboDude222, but it was the exact same list that we covered already by Venom1. So again, 3 top 2 finishes on Gruul Prowess, repeat of the same list. So a little bit less than we usually cover because there's usually 2 tournaments on Saturday. So hopefully next week we'll be able to talk a little bit more in depth. Again, if you want to talk about a specific archetype, reach out to me. If you want to be like, hey, what's happening to Domain and Best of 3? I love talking about Magic the Gathering, and that's why I do this. So feel free to ask me any questions in the comments below. I will answer every comment that you guys leave, or at least I try my best. And so Azorius Omniscience, this is also one that has had no changes since the previous list, or previous time that we talked about it. You're trying to get Omniscience into the graveyard so that you can then bring it back with a Blaze Awakening. I talked about this archetype and variations of it in my Meta Breakers yesterday as well. So this one is running the Picklock Prankster. It's kind of the standard build, I think. And the sideboard, is where we're seeing the most variation. So again, no changes to the sideboard from the previous week. But if you want to see some things that have been explored, like how we can give this deck haste so that it's not just sitting around not doing anything. Some interesting ideas of bringing some black into the sideboard. The Unnerving Grasp gives you the Manifest Dread. So you loop by playing the Manifest Dread. It takes a card out of your library, Season of Weaving, and then can copy the creature off of the Unnerving Grasp. But then you do need to survive a turn because you don't have haste. And like I said, in the meta breakers that I covered yesterday, there is a solution to that, as well as kind of an alternative way to get the loop going with the This Town Ain't Big Enough. So with that, though, I've talked enough. Thank you for listening to my ramblings, and I will catch you all next week for next Sunday for some more meta breakers, as well as next Monday we'll continue to talk about the best of 1, best of 3 meta decks. If you like this sort of thing, feel free to reach out and support the channel by becoming a YouTube member. I really appreciate those who have. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And next week, I think I will be able to do the community deck tech. So I'll know tomorrow. Look for the bat signal. I'll post it, and then we'll talk about your decks the following week. And eventually we will get to the Aether Drift in February, where we'll see kind of a more substantial shakeup to the meta. And as always, take care, everybody. Good luck on your RCQs, and good luck climbing the ladder. Catch you later.